I guess this is the obvious question. I mean, we're interested in film here, but I have to ask: is there is there more of a satisfaction performing on stage because you get that immediate reaction with the audience?
Yeah, I've had some incredible experiences doing theater. I mean, where I was doing a production of Death of a Salesman, and one particular night, this will sound crazy, but one particular night, it felt like the whole theater, it was about this size, 100 seats, and from the beginning to the end, I only remember being the character. I don't remember what happened in the green room in between scenes. I was playing one of the sons. I remember other nights I used to play cards and solitaire and talk to people, but I don't remember anything that happened that night. I only remember what happened out on the stage. It's the only curtain call I've enjoyed, and it was felt like the whole theater had been taken up into a space station or something. And somebody had just removed our minds from anything other than what we were doing. It was as if we were running around inside Arthur Miller, the playwright's mind.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had this habit. We used to go to a restaurant afterwards. This is over on Bloor Street, and we went to the restaurant. And just like you hear about people who say they were kidnapped by aliens, they tend to be embarrassed about it. And that's kind of almost the feeling we had. We had a kind of a euphoric feeling on one hand, but on the other hand, we could hardly look at each other. We were sitting at the table, and we could hardly look at each other. We didn't understand what had happened that night. We all felt that way.
But it was exposing yourself in some way, like an emotional...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's got to be very difficult to have to share to strangers.
Well, yeah, that's the challenge of it, and that's the euphoria of it, is even without that kind of thing happening, but after a pretty good performance and all that kind of stuff, there's kind of a euphoria. I remember on this particular production, sometimes it was on the subway line, and I'd quickly change afterwards and run down and jump on the subway, and the streetcar, or the subway was the east-west line. The subway would fill up with people who had just been in the theater. So I'd sit there and I'd be listening to them talking about the play they had just seen, and I'm sitting there in the subway car taking it all in. It's exciting. It's like the high wire act without the net,
Yeah, you are exposed, and if anything goes wrong,
there's no take two.
Exactly. Well, right, and then in film there is. So I imagine that euphoric experience that you have on stage, if it's possible to get that doing a film, it's much harder.
It is. It's funny. I remember one time I was doing a series called ENG.
Mike, what was his character?
Mike Fennell from ENG, and there was this coming script where he breaks down and cries. So I decided I want that to be real. I want to, I'm going to really work on some stuff, the method, and work on what would make me cry and what would make me really cry, because that's always a challenge for actors. Some actors can cry just on a whim like that, and others, I'm one of those who can't necessarily cry when I'm acting. So I thought I'm going to really do it sincerely this time. So I'm working away, and I became miserable around people. They were just going, you know what? You're just being an ass lately. I don't know why. I said, well, I'm working on this thing. It was making me depressed. Anyway, long story short, I ended up doing the scene. I really succeeded in crying and breaking down in a way and doing the scene. It was great. And then I went and looked at it, and I could have easily faked it. Nobody would know. It was like, it didn't matter. It really didn't matter, because in the end, when you're acting and you do a certain thing, like for instance, let's say you're upset, you decide, as a method actor, okay, I'm going to be upset. I can't be upset about what's happening in the dramatic moment about, I've lost my mother or something, but I haven't really lost my mother, so I can't cry about that. But I'm going to be upset because I remember that time when I was a child and I lost my pet dog. So that's going to be what's going on inside me. The audience won't know. So that's what happens. The actor does this, oh, I'm so upset about losing my mother. But it's really, he's regurgitating the fact that he lost his dog. So the audience doesn't know you're crying about losing your dog. They think it's the other thing, so they're moved and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's in a
all
way,
sleight of hand.
It's real, but it's fake. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's what you said, sort of with the comparing being a stockbroker with this. They're both liars, but and in some ways, except the lines are better written.
Much better written. It's better to, instead of some guy writing about selling your stock, you're having Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller write your lines.
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
great.
Were you there when Arthur Miller came to town to visit? I guess it was in the late '80s.
No,
No, okay.
No, I was in
because that would
LA.
have been quite an experience.
Yeah.
He did come for a short period. I am really impressed with some of the people you worked with. We already talked about Bob Clark, who has made, I think, such a mark on Canadian cinema. Cronenberg, obviously.
Yeah.
The Brood was really. I think he might have done Shivers before that. The Brood was maybe his third film.
Scanners, Shivers.
Yeah, Scanners, Shivers.
Rabid.
There was that whole series of horror films. Then suddenly The Brood came up, and there was something more linear about it, something a little more sophisticated about it. Maybe because it had Oliver Reed and you and Samantha Agard in it.
Bigger budget. Yeah.
A bigger budget, and but Cronenberg. I mean, we were still thinking of him as a horror movie director at that point.
I didn't really have any opinion about him. I was in town. I was living in LA. I was in town just visiting, and my agent sent me over there, and I met this guy. I didn't have any idea who he was. He didn't know who I was. In fact, the only thing I remember about the meeting, and it was at his house or something, in his really sparsely furnished living room, was he said to me, he leaned over and he said, is Lang Hindle really your brother? And Lang Hindle, my brother, was a fairly well-known motorcycle racer at the time, and David Cronenberg, as you might or might not know, is a speed freak, you know, cars, motorcycles. All he wanted to know is if that was really my brother, and I said, yeah, he is. And he said, okay, great. Well, you got the part. So
that was your audition.
That was it.
Oh, did you thank your brother?
It was. I told him about that.
Yeah.
He reminds me of. He was racing one time. The CBC decided to cover motorcycle racing, and he was being interviewed by this CBC person, and she was talking to him, and finally one of his answers was, "No, a motorcycle has two wheels." And she sort of said, "Oh, I guess you realize I really don't know much about what I'm talking about here, or what I'm asking." She says, "So, you have to excuse me. I've just been transferred to sports from the drama department. I was in casting in the drama department. They transferred me to sports." He says, "Oh," he says, "well, maybe drama department." He says, "Maybe you know my brother Art Hindle." And she said, "Art Hindle, no. What kind of motorcycle does he race?" So that was that was kind of what actors were faced with in those days. Nobody knew us. We were, we used to joke that the two ways of being anonymous are the witness protection program or being an actor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But you say that, and all I could remember is as a young man, again, looking on the screen, and I knew Art Hindle right away. I knew him from The Brood. I knew him in Black Christmas. I knew him. I was actually really thrilled to see you in Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, that was a big treat.
That is a film that I think most people thought was going to fail.
Well, I didn't have any opinion other than I knew that, Phil Kaufman was, the director was fabulous.
Yeah.
Our cinematographer was fabulous. We had fabulous actors in it. Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland, as you know.
Jeff Goldblum, I think,
and
was
Jeff
in that.
Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright. And it was just fabulous making it, and and you knew something was happening. I mean, the cinematographer, Michael Chapman.
Who also did the Inuit film.
Yeah, he's done a ton of films, famous films. I remember one time we were rehearsing, and he was hanging like off Phil Kaufman's shoulder, kind of just staring. I've never seen a cinematographer do this before. And he'd watch every rehearsal like a hawk, you know. And then I realized later what was happening. He said, Art, he said, you know when you do that thing and you bend down there, and you know your character's thinking, you know, this, or you've changed into a body snatcher and this is happening. He said, can you just do that a little slower? I said, yeah, but why? He says, because I'm changing the lighting at that moment. And the reason he was changing it, he was lighting it according to what your character was going through.
Wow.
And he would change it in the middle of the shot. So when he was watching rehearsals, he was watching to see what your character was doing, and he wanted to complement what your character was going through in that movie, in that scene, by his lighting.
Right. So you didn't
Genius.
have to. Yeah, you didn't have to adjust your performance to suit his lighting.
Not really.
He adjusted
Only
his
minor.
lighting.
If it just meant just go a little slower there because I've got to make this light come in here and I've got to bring it up here at that moment.
And I know exactly the scene you're talking about. It's when Brooke Adams comes into the house, and we just realized the doctor has been acting very strangely lately, and he's standing facing the camera with his back to Brooke.
Yeah.
And you slide. I remember that
Right.
scene, and it's
and
brilliant.
there's a depth of focus there.
It's
too.
wonderful.
So,
Yeah, I've been to Michael Chapman's house in L.A. To talk about The White Dawn, which he did with, I forget the actor's name, but it was in The Wild Bunch, but also Timothy
Bottoms.
and the sorts. All snow, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up his name.
Oh yeah, no, you could look him up, and he's done. I can't remember everything he's done, but you say, oh, he's done that. Taxi Driver.
Yeah, he's phenomenal, and that was all about shades and contrast.
Exactly.
Too.
You know that he complements what the actor and what the director are doing. He's very much involved. He's almost, you know, if you're the actor rehearsing a scene, you almost, you know, he's almost got his nose in there. You know, excuse me, Michael, could you just get back here because I'm going to exit there. You know.
I love these stories about being on set and what creates a scene. And one of the things you said at the beginning of our discussion, or our conversation rather, is that you didn't feel like you were doing important films. And once again, Body Snatchers, it's a science fiction. And what made me think, and I think a lot of people think, why are they doing this? It was a classic film. And don't you dare touch a classic. You did something, or Philip Kaufman did, and so did its cast.
Philip did it, yeah.
You made a classic a better film.
We made a classic out of a classic, and still a lot of people say it probably is the best remake of an original classic.
I agree.
And I agree wholeheartedly. It's subsequently people have tried to make it again, and they just can't match what Phil Kaufman did and what he brought to it. And I mean, I point this out to young filmmakers who are making horror movies and sci-fi movies. I say, you know, like look at Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The one thing it has is it has believable human beings in it. It has humor. Very rarely do people put humor into their sci-fi or horror movies, and it's very important because, you know, people need to laugh in those things. People need to go, oh. You know, they don't need to keep being built up with tension and more tension. I'm going to add more tension. I'm going to add more jump moments in a scene. I'm going to have more slam cuts where people go, what the hell is that? You know, and then they're waiting for the next slam cut. You know,
I call those cheat frights.
Yeah, you know, I remember I was at a horror convention here, and a young filmmaker said, "Would you come and it's screening in screening room 2? Would you come and see my little short?" And it was 20 minutes or something. And I had my wife with me, who'd neither of us really are crazy about horror films and things like that. Her, much less so. And so we went to see it, and then later he caught up to me. He says, "Did you think it was good?" And I said, "Well, on the Brooke-o-meter, my wife's o-meter, she jumped 7 times, so I think it's a very good film. You know, it's a very good horror movie because you had her."
Did she jump because the tension was there and everything was there? Like it wasn't.
Yeah, it builds up, and then suddenly, you know, this stuff happens, you know, and so I joke with her about it. She understands that, but you know, they that's what they build up for and that's part of what they think makes a great film is having these jump moments. There's very few of those jump moments in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for instance. They're wisely economical in it. You know,
Well,
there's a couple.
And I think the tension in Body Snatchers is in the reveals.
Yeah.
Like the reveal of the Doctor, your character, when the audience knows and Brooke doesn't yet.
Yeah.
By the way, I have to say, Brooke Adams, I met in person in L.A. many years later. There is a woman stunningly beautiful on screen, but even more so in person.
Yes.
And underrated actor, too. I think.
Yeah, she's, you know, I think she should have probably had a bigger career, but I think she didn't want to have a bigger career. She is, you know, she had children. She was very happy having children, and she's very happy with her marriage to Tony. And
Yeah, I always say Stanley Tucci, but it's Tony somebody.
Shaboob.
Shaboob, yeah. Not Tony Nardi. That's somebody else. Yeah, that's a Canadian actor joke.
I know Tony. I've worked with him a few times.
Yeah.